if you're a demon like me, it's Christmas. So this is really, really staggering. We've obviously been paying a lot of attention to Terra USD and Kwon, and we did some of the early reporting that, frankly, I believe triggered the rush to the exits as people realized just how bad the situation was. We now have charges from the SEC, and what's really notable about this is often when charges come down from the SEC or other regulators, they pretty much are just a laundry list of things we already know. These charging documents include huge new drops of information. And I'll just mention two right up front. One is that we have confirmation that in May of 2021, that is a year before the actual unwind and collapse, there was a smaller loss of the peg, and that was actively bailed out by a third party. And so that basically the implication is that every time somebody like Kwon after that said Terra USD is stable, that was a fraudulent claim because they knew that they had to be bailed out prior to that. The second big revelation that I want to mention up front is that the SEC claims that Kwon and or his allies have access to a huge stash of Bitcoin that was funneled out of various entities, and that they have cashed out as much as $100 million worth of it via a Swiss bank. And so that is stuff that people have been trying to trace, haven't been able to nail it down. Now we have very clear claims from the US SEC of those two particular things. So it makes it much more clear that Terra USD was an overt fraud almost from the very beginning. Zach, I saw you throw up a hand.
As alleged by the SEC, it was a lie the whole time. The original use case that drove Terra into prominence, Chai, the usage of Chai, a payments platform in Korea that seemed to indicate that they was seeing major traction relating to the Terra blockchain, relied on fabricated numbers by Kwon and by Terraform Labs. So that to me is like sort of the initial, like the original sin that launched it into sort of the crypto awareness. Oh, here's an interesting payments thing that's happening in Korea. Oh wow, actually it turns out that the whole genesis story of this potentially interesting thing was concocted. So that to me is like very striking. And I mean, David, you're right to mention the Swiss bank thing. That's a very big allegation. $100 million since June 2022, a month after it hit the fan. Kwon and his friends seemingly cashed out $100 million. And I think the SEC goes to great lengths in the complaint itself to point out the regular average investors who lost big time. Talking about $20,000 sum for a son's college education gone. We're talking about $400,000, from someone in Kansas who took out loans, gone, contrasted very prominently in this filing document with the $100 million that's been cashed out through a Swiss bank linked to allegedly a cold wallet administered by Kwon and his associates. So personally, I just want to go back and correct my own record. I think I've been on this show and said, hey, Terra worked until it didn't. No, Terra never worked as alleged in these documents. Terra was always founded on fabrications. And this is a pretty damning indictment of Kwon's involvement in this thing from the get-go, even before May 2022, when it first emerged into sort of the bigger consciousness. So anyway, I would like to correct the record and say, no, it didn't work until it didn't. It seemingly never really worked properly ever. I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, good on you. And we'll open the discussion, but I do want to point out one more piece of CoinDesk reporting that was just published a couple of minutes ago, which is that there is an unnamed third party in these documents, and CoinDesk reporter Sam Kessler and Tracy Wang have been able to contact their sources, and we appear to have confirmed that unnamed third party was Jump Crypto, which means that this is one of the backers of the system in the first place. They participated in this bailout, which may implicate them in fraud charges themselves to the extent that they profited from the benefits of that appearance of stability generated by the May 21 bailout. And a spokesperson for Jump did not reply to, or had no comment when we reached out to them to seek their side of the story. So they're not denying that at this point. Zach.
All right, I got out my little righteous indignation. I do want to zoom out a little bit and say that this is also pretty damning for the crypto sector as a whole. If you look at this complaint alleging that investing in stablecoins, which don't have sort of an expectation of return, but investing in stablecoins itself puts investors in a common enterprise, right? Which is another prong of sort of securities definitions that U.S. regulators use. So this is pretty broad in its reach relating to both stablecoins, but also how most crypto businesses go about getting the word out about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So if you read the complaint itself, I think there is reason to be concerned for firms that are operating in the US or firms that are operating overseas with US personnel, because some of this stuff is pretty standard practice in terms of, hey, we're putting out our development updates, we're putting out new and exciting announcements. That, in the eyes of the SEC, in this instance, is seen as promoting, and in this case, is seen as bolstering their case against some of these claims that may not ultimately be true. But anyway, I think for the broader picture there is interesting.
I want to let Adam in, but I want to make one clarifying comment there, Zach. We need to dig deeper, but my impression from reading the documents is not that the stablecoin itself was considered a common enterprise. They leaned really heavily on Anchor, which, for those who remember, was where you could deposit the stablecoin and get these outsized 20% yields. So it's we may need to dig further, but my impression was not necessarily they were targeting all stablecoins are common enterprises, but that they were offering outsized returns using this specific stable coin. And so it's kind of the entire system. But Adam, you wanted to get in, go for it.
I mean, I think that if we're looking at this in the totality of everything that's been alleged here, what we find is that this, irrespective of what it was called or represented, does appear to be a fraud from the beginning. And that then puts a different light on a lot of reporting, that was done over the course of the last couple of years. David, I remember a story that you wrote last year talking about the Anchor system, and also talking about the Luna Guard, right, which was this big sort of nonprofit fund that was supposed to take some of the profit that was coming from elsewhere in the system, and then use that to buy lots of Bitcoin to defend the peg should the peg ever break. And what you were talking about earlier is that part of that $100 million that's been alleged to have been taken out came from Terra Luna, or came from the Luna Foundation Guard. So
yeah, it turns out LFG stands for Let's Friggin' Go to Serbia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at that, if you just take those two pieces of information, then what you find is that here's a fund of money that is intended explicitly to prevent the collapse of the system, that was not used to prevent the collapse of the system, and was instead transferred to a personal wallet, or transferred to a wallet where it was not used for that purpose. So we thought at the time that Terra collapsed that they had just burned through all of that money that was there.
Well, they burned through a lot of it, but not all of it.
Well, not all of it, clearly. If there's the still total kind of raise,
they had like $3 billion. So the 100 million that's left over is out of 3 billion, but still,
exactly,
they got away with a lot.
It's pocket change, except it's not pocket change. It's still $100 million, right? So I don't know. There's a bunch of other elements of this story, but let's go to Jen. I want to get you in here before we end.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. I think this just reiterates that we need to take a really hard look at this industry. I think back to the interviews that Kwon did after this thing exploded, and I remember it was so SBF-esque. I remember him saying, we couldn't have known this. I'm so sorry. We really cared about retail investors. This is not where we wanted it to go. He didn't mention that he had previously failed at a project just like this under a pseudonymous name that was never revealed. And so to hear this is just really upsetting that we've propped these people up, and the SEC, I think, did a really good job at doing their homework and looking into all of these things. I haven't seen the SEC do research like this before and publish it and us have these big revelations. And I just think that it is a little bit of a wake-up call for the industry. And I don't know. I think what's going to happen to Jump Crypto? I look at them, through a different lens now. I don't know, Zach, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. The media angle, right? Like when someone is out here peddling mistruths, I wonder how much there is to be done and how maybe antagonistic crypto media should be going forward. Going to be interesting to watch.